On today's episode of Empowering Women in Real Estate, the podcast, we have part 3 of our systems series on follow-up.
Hi, I'm Karen Cooper, a wife, mom of 3, real estate broker, team owner, and founder of Empowering Women in Real Estate. As a realtor, I've personally helped well over 700 families in my career, and now I help thousands of women from all across the country balance real life and real estate through daily inspiration, motivation, and actionable plans to increase their success. Listen in as I share stories and tips from my life and business and interview some of my favorite people.
Hi there, I'm glad you're here for today's episode. So this is part three of our systems series. Every week this month, we have, if you're listening to these at the time that they air, we are in the middle of a systems series, and it is a total of 5 episodes around the 5 systems that I firmly believe that every realtor needs. So if you want to listen back, you can actually go back to episode 372, where I really talk about why systems, a lot of the misconceptions around systems, what makes for a good system. And then episode 373 is part 1, that is all about prospecting. Episode 374 is part 2, and that is all about the nurture system. So episodes 1 and 2 really do go hand in hand. It's all about how to generate business. And then now today is episode 3, and it's all about follow-up. Follow-up, or I also will call it weekly updates, is something that I do. And this is a system that is really more around your active business, right? Episodes part 1 and 2 were about generating business, bringing in the business. And now here we are with part 3 is keeping the business that you have and taking care of that business. And when I say the business that you have, I mean people who are either you have an active listing agreement with, buyers that you are under contract with, or people that you are actively in the process, right? You're talking actively, preparing to get their home on the market. You are talking actively, preparing for them to purchase the home. You're showing them homes or renting. And so you need a system for that. You need a system around it. And the reason you need a system is because, here's the thing. We're human and we have a lot of things on our plates and we forget. And sometimes we just forget. You lose track. You lose track of who you've been in touch with. You lose track of who you've talked to. And, before you know it, week 2, 3, 4 can go by and you haven't touched base. And, if it's a buyer that you aren't under contract with yet, you've just been looking at homes. Well, I promise you, 2, 3, 4 weeks go by and you haven't been in touch with them. That doesn't mean that they've stopped looking for homes. They've probably been popping into open houses, and who knows, maybe they've even moved on to somebody else by then. If you have an active listing, I think this is one of the hardest parts. And this is really where I started this system, this follow-up system, this weekly update system. I was always a very strong listing agent. I carried at times, 20 plus listings at a time. And we went through, I survived the market crash many years ago. And the average days on market for my area, the specific type of property that I sold, the rural area, was a year. And that's a long time. That's a really long time to have a listing. And it was hard. Sometimes I didn't have anything to say. And so what happens, right now we see shifts in our market, and, some listings still move really quickly, but others, they sit a little bit. And so it feels uncomfortable. What do you do? What do you say? And so then sometimes we don't do or say anything. And then animosity starts to breed. The seller's like, well, I haven't heard from her. What's going on? And you don't know what to say, so you don't reach out. And it just makes for a very tumultuous transaction and situation. And so this is one of the reasons that you need this system. And so the follow-up system, I call it my weekly update system because basically that's what I'm doing, is a weekly update. It's systematizing your updates or follow-ups to your current active clients. And when you do that, there's 3 things that happen, right? One is, obviously, as I already said, you're less likely to forget somebody when you have a system around this. 2 is You build trust. Anytime you clearly establish expectations, right? People know what to expect, and then you meet that expectation consistently, you're establishing trust. You're building trust with them. And that's a pretty, that's what you want. That's what you want in your business. Everything works better when that trust is there. And so when the client knows, and I would talk about this when I would go on my listing appointment, I would let them know this is how I follow up and this is what you're going to hear from me. And I did that consistently. And so they trusted me. The client trusted me. The third thing that it does, which is huge, is you save time. You save time because you cut down on the number of incoming calls. And I know I've shared this multiple times on the show before, but I was a certified mentor for Buffini and Company. In one of the courses that I taught multiple times, or moderated, I guess, as they would say it, with peak producers. And one of the sessions talked about this. And Brian would say that if you make a call out to someone, right? You make a call out to follow up with your client, you're talking like maybe 5 minutes, right? Touch and base, here's what's going on. Do you have any questions? You're in and out, right? But when it's the reverse and they're calling you, it's going to take 3 times as long. You are behind the 8 ball. You are playing catch up, right? If they're calling you because they haven't heard from you. And so when you have that consistent update, I saw this so much when I, was actively working with sellers, and a lot of times they wouldn't call me a lot because they knew what to expect. They knew they were going to hear from me. Now, of course, things would come up, and if it's something urgent, I'm reaching out in a timely fashion, and if they had something urgent, they were reaching out to me. But for those things, think about all the calls that you get from sellers or from buyers. A lot of those calls are not urgent. And it's just, a stream of consciousness thought something. 6 years ago, when I began shifting away from serving clients myself, but still producing a high level of volume and income, I wish there had been a model or a blueprint to follow. And that's why I've created the Midlife Real Estate Blueprint. It's the next step for experienced women in real estate who want to keep the income and change the way they work. Inside this program, you'll redesign your role, install simple, repeatable systems, and create margin for what matters to you while staying highly productive. We have 2 programs now available, a 5-week live program with coaching and community, or a self-paced edition that you can start anytime. When you're ready, visit empoweringwomeninrealestate.com and click on Midlife Real Estate Blueprint. And so when they know when they're going to hear from you and that expectation is clear, it cuts down on so much of that. And so, that alone is a great reason to have a system for this in your business. So here's what this used to look like for me. So obviously, I share this very clearly. I am out of personal production from the perspective that I don't serve the clients anymore. I generate a lot of business. In fact, I just hit elite at my brokerage, which is the status, for the highest production level in terms of, I generate a lot of business and it's all served by my team members. And all of the business I generate is generated through these systems that I've talked to you about, the part 1 and part 2 with the prospecting and nurture. That is where all of my business is generated. But this is the system that I had for many years in my business. And what I did is I had a weekly follow-up schedule, which I clearly communicated to my clients. Very simple, right? Go back to a couple episodes ago. If you've been following along with the system series, these don't need to be complicated. In fact, the more complicated your system is, the harder it is to execute. So my system was very simple. It was a weekly update, and you can adjust this based on what your business looks like. So when I first started doing the weekly update system, I did the same day every week. Wednesday tended to be my day that I would do my weekly updates. And so I would block time on Wednesdays. And so I knew that that would be when I was going to be doing my updates, and I would let my clients know, and they would know to expect for me that they were going to hear from me on Wednesday. So that just fit. Some people, it would be via email. Some people, it would be a phone call. It just depended on the relationship I had with the client and also how they liked to communicate. But then the busier I got in my business and the more listings I had, the more active clients I had at a time, it no longer worked for me to do it all in one day because it just felt like it was too much. So what I would do then is I would do this weekly update. I would do follow-ups every single day, Monday through Friday, but only for a small number of people. So if I met with you on a Monday and I signed your listing agreement on a Monday, then that meant that your weekly update day was Monday. And so every Monday I was following up with that client, and then same with Tuesday. And so that way I was able to spread the larger pool of clients across more days. And so it felt more manageable. So there's no right or wrong here. It's just whatever makes sense for you. But the thing is to just be really clear in communicating that with your clients. When I would meet with a new buyer, when I would meet with a seller, I would be really clear with them. Hey, this is what I do. When I would talk to sellers, and when I would go on listing appointments, one of the questions that I would ask, is, have you ever sold a home before? Yes. And then I would ask, well, and could I ask why you chose not to work with that realtor again? And one of the things that I would hear a lot is either, that, they never heard from that person again, so they didn't know. Or something else that I would hear a lot is, well, they did a great job getting my listing on the market, but then I didn't hear from them. Like I didn't know what was going on. And so, I would talk about that at my listing appointment about, well, I don't want you to experience that. I'm going to keep you in the loop with what's happening. There are things happening nonstop throughout this process. And so I'm going to be keeping you updated, and here's how I'm going to do it. And here's when you can expect to hear from me. And so I established that trust. And because I followed through, because I did what I said I was going to do, I set the expectation and then I did it. So much trust was built, and it just made the client relationship, so much better all the way through. And for me, the follow-up system would really start from the time the relationship began. So either the time the listing agreement was signed or the buyer agency agreement was signed. And then I would continue that weekly update until really a week or two after settlement. So a week or two after settlement, I'd just be reaching out to make sure, how did everything go? Are you feeling comfortable in the house? Just kind of that kind of final follow-up. But otherwise, I'm following up all the way through, right? So with sellers every week, it's, kind of summarizing what's happened. Obviously, if feedback had come through, I would use a feedback system where it would automatically forward the feedback to the client, but then I would give a summary. This past week, we've had this many showings. This was the feedback that we got. This many listings came on the market that are similar to yours, or this comp that is similar to yours just went under contract, or this one just sold, and here's what happened. Here's what we're doing from a marketing perspective. Here's, I did this ad, or, this Facebook ad, or we're doing a Burgers Open, or, whatever I'm doing for them. Here's what you can expect next week. Here's what's coming up next. So, I'm letting the seller could then feel comfortable that, I'm just not sitting back and waiting for a buyer to come through. I'm giving them an update of what's happening throughout the process. Once they were under contract, then obviously it got more simple. But I would still do the weekly update, letting them know, okay, we've met this guy. Okay, now that the home inspection is passed, now we're going to be moving into this phase, and now we're waiting for the appraisal to be done. Here's what you need to be doing. You need to be, think about all the things that we take for granted because we do this all the time, and our clients don't. You need to contact the utility companies to set up your transfers, or, whatever the different things are. For buyers, when we're active in the looking phase, again, kind of summaries. Hey, here's what's happening in the market right now. Haven't seen anything that come on that meet your criteria. Here's something else that did come on that could work for you. If they're under contract, same thing. Here's what you should be expecting. Here's what's going to happen next. The actual communication did not take me very long. Now, sometimes for listings, it would take a little bit longer if I was having to pull together more data or things like that. But for the most part, it did not take very long. And so I could go through a lot of weekly updates in a very quick period of time, but the client felt seen. The client felt comfortable with what was happening. It was good for me too, right? Because when you are not being proactive in your business and waiting for things to come to you, that is not a good place to be. It would require me to be proactive in my business, to be proactive in seeing what else is happening in the market, seeing, what else is out there, seeing what's gone under contract. And so it just changes everything. And so, yeah, that's short and sweet for today, but that is my weekly update system. So if you don't already have some kind of system for follow-up, and I'm not talking about drips, right? Nobody wants to be dripped on. I'm not talking about like a drip campaign. I'm not talking about like an automated thing that you set up in your CRM. This is like follow up for your active clients where you are actively engaged in following up with them. You need a system for that. And so again, make it simple, communicate it clearly, set the expectations, and I think you'll find it will be a very good thing for your business. So next week, part 4 in our system series next week is all about visibility. So until then, stay well.
Thank you for listening to Empowering Women in Real Estate, the podcast. Click subscribe to be notified every Wednesday when our latest episode is released, and be sure to check out our group on Facebook.